Welcome to a Catholic Overview of the Bible video program number 9. The events between the Maccabees' heroic struggle against the Greeks, with a significant cleansing of the temple in 164 BC, and the birth of Jesus about 6 to 7 BC, have everything to do with the politics, religious and otherwise, that combined to attempt to destroy him. In this complicated history, a wily politician arises in Idumea who takes advantage of every event to further himself with the power at hand. This is Antipater II, who heads this chart. It is Herod's family tree. He appears in the second line with 3 of his brothers, sons of Antipater, who inherit his cunningness. Of Herod's 10 wives, Mariamne was his favorite, but her Hasmonean roots stirred his suspicions. She was related to people who had their eyes on his throne, and in his paranoia he had her murdered, and later also 2 of her sons who were to have been his heirs. It could be a death sentence to be related to Herod. Yet 3 sons would inherit his divided kingdom and rule for Rome after his death. Herod Philip, 4th from the left, Archelaus next, and Herod Antipas, 7th, each were given a part of the kingdom. Herodias, under the green line, the controversial wife in the 4th generation, was related to Antipas and Philip as their niece, and also married both men. The second marriage to Herod Antipas, which John the Baptist condemned, caused John's death. The chart also shows that Herodias' daughter Salome, who requested John's head in the lower right corner, married another of Herod's sons, the purple line, a second Philip. The red outlined area was put under Archelaus' rule, but he was so bad a ruler, the Romans removed him after 1 year and began a series of appointed governors, of whom Pilate was the 5th. Herod Antipas ruled the area of Galilee outlined in green, and Herod Philip the northern area outlined in brown. The 2 both had Herodias as a wife. With this as our road map, we will take a little trip to acquaint ourselves with some of the intertestamental history of events and the famous places where they happened. We begin at the north end of the Dead Sea at Jericho and continue down the western shore of the Dead Sea to visit Qumran and Masada. This is the dark-lined road on the western shore. Then we'll take a side trip to Nabateh, to the south and east of the Dead Sea, then back west along the dark-lined road, making a sharp right turn back to Jerusalem through some of the sites that Herod the Great's building fervor made famous: Hebron, the Herodian, and finally Jerusalem. 2 sites we will visit are off this oval. One is at Sebaste, visited in passing, and the other will be Caesarea on the coast, which Herod made into a showplace to impress visiting Roman dignitaries who would come into port there. The evaporation of the Dead Sea lays a cloud of moisture over Jericho. This oasis, below sea level, remains warm when Jerusalem's winter becomes damp and cold. Directly below is the excavation of Herod the Great's winter palace, where he came to escape the unheated Jerusalem palace. We approach the site of the palace complex. Here Herod reportedly killed his eldest son when he came visiting. Some of the beautiful diagonal brickwork and terrazzo floors surround what may have been a central pond. Herod's winter palace was extensive, with courtyards, including the colonnaded at the back, and many rooms for the family, for guests, for slaves, as well as kitchens, tables, maintenance, and storage areas. We leave Jericho and head south along the barren shores of the Dead Sea, the lowest and deadest spot on earth. Our next destination is Qumran, where religious separatists who despaired of Jerusalem ever becoming truly God-centered again, under the degenerate Hasmonean successors, went off into the wilderness to live celibate lives and center themselves on the Holy Scriptures. Here, some of the rooms of the Qumran Complex have been excavated. This was the enclave of the Essenes, also called the Holy Ones, of whom John the Baptist may have been a member. His worldview seems to echo what we know of the beliefs of this community. Within this well-planned complex, they prayed, meditated, and took frequent ritual baths to purify themselves for the coming of the Messiah. Here they worked as scribes, copying the holy books on leather scrolls. A canal system with reservoirs provided cleansing water. The system included a watchtower, a kitchen, stables, pottery works, and whatever else was necessary to keep them nearly self-sufficient. Water was assiduously saved from whatever came flowing down the western cliffs when rain that fell above in the Jerusalem vicinity made it possible. In 1947, a young Arab boy herding sheep threw a stone into a cave and heard pottery break. We see that cave up on the cliff side. What he found would astound the world. Inside were sealed jars containing ancient Hebrew manuscripts written before the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. They had been hidden in the caves before the Romans destroyed the Qumran community. The hills surrounding Qumran soon were found to have other caves, and more manuscripts were found. This brought much excitement to the scholarly world, for such ancient documents of the Bible had never been found before. The story of getting those manuscripts into the right hands is as suspenseful as a cloak and dagger novel. The biblical texts predate the oldest Hebrew manuscripts known by 1,000 years. Yet comparisons show very few discrepancies through centuries of scribal transmissions, which tell us that the Holy Spirit has preserved Scripture for us. The contents of the scrolls include fragments of all books of the Old Testament except Esther, also apocryphal and apocalyptic works in Hebrew and Aramaic, and material on Essene doctrine. Some of the scrolls are made of copper, telling of treasures buried in Jerusalem, treasures that have never been found. 2 complete scrolls of Isaiah were among the wonderful documents. The state of Israel, recognizing the priceless value of the Qumran parchments, built this museum in the shape of the top of the clay jars that held the scrolls when they were found. Its rounded white form is in the background, contrasted against the black wall. The building is known as the Shrine of the Book. The Shrine of the Book, with the Knesset, Israel's parliament building, on the horizon. Inside the Shrine of the Book, the great scroll of the book of Isaiah is the centerpiece. Leaving Qumran, our next destination is along this barren shore, further to the south. This great outcropping of freestanding rock, called Masada, has been a natural fortress for countless generations of the inhabitants of Palestine. David used this for a fortress. and King Herod was to convert it into a hideout, where, if worse came to worse, he could be sustained with food and water for the rest of his life. To reach the top, some of the more sturdy and adventuresome climb. However, most use the cable car. Centuries before such conveniences, and because of sheer cliffs on all four sides, this fortress was very easy to defend. The path below eventually leads to the top for those with strong legs. Herod built extensively on the top of Masada, making it a getaway for himself. Stocked not only with food and water to last a lifetime, it also had defensive weapons with which to hold off any enemies. Included in his construction was this extraordinary palace villa built on 3 terraces. His main palace was on the top tier. The other 2 pavilions were for lounging and eating and enjoying the view from a cliff top that plunged down 1,300 feet. Archaeologists' reconstruction is above the dark line. The young Herod came here with Mariamne when they were engaged. Here he had left her with members of her family while he went off to find help in his war in Jerusalem. When king, he realized how important a safe refuge would be if his enemies ever got the best of him, and he had the whole site rebuilt. Cisterns were strategically placed to receive water channeled from the western hills. It was at Masada in AD 67 that Jewish defenders committed suicide rather than surrendering to Roman troops. Outlines of the Roman camps where the troops lived who came to siege the rock in AD 74 can still be seen 19 centuries later. Another view of the Rock of Masada, the great fortress, with the Dead Sea up at the top and the outline of the Roman camp set to besiege the rock there in the foreground. In 1984, a movie was made, and for that, these replicas of Roman siege machines were built for the TV movie. When the production was complete, they were left behind in the desert and are still to be seen. The defenders of Masada had a store of stone missiles. A rich terrazzo floor still speaks of the splendor Herod lavished on this fortress, which was a monument to his paranoia. Leaving Masada, we travel on down the Dead Sea shore, where tourists can stop to enjoy a swim in the heavy salt water. It's a swim like no other. Impossible to sink. People rather sit on the water. Look, no hands. A waterbed without the plastic. Leaving the Dead Sea area, we turn off to the south and east to the land called Edom, or in later history, Nabateh. Edom was the land given to Esau back in the early history of God's people. It was known to be a barren land of red rock, even as Esau's name meant red. Here, after leaving Mariamne at Masada, Herod fled from Antigonus II and the Parthians, hoping to get help from Aretas, king of Nabateh. He didn't find help here, so he went on to Egypt and finally to Rome, where Augustus did befriend him, named him king of Palestine, and supported his efforts to wrest the land from his enemies. Into these rock walls, the Nabateans carved a large number of tombs between 200 BC and 100 AD. This is a famous tourist stop called Petra. At one time, Petra was thought to be the capital of Nabateh, but now it's considered to have been a burial place, the building's only facades of tombs, and the largest building a temple. The only entrance to this necropolis is through a slim passage in the rock, which has appeared in one of the Indiana Jones series of movies. This tomb is carved out of its own rock. A Roman road in Nabateh. After the Edomites took over southern Judea, eventually changing its name to Idumea, Arab traders who had been pressing them took over Edom, or Nabateh, and became wealthy by controlling the trade routes through their area. We leave Nabateh and resume our trip around the Red Sea, now turning north, paralleling its western shore, but a little further into the countryside. We make a brief stop at Hebron, where we have visited before in these video programs. Here David was first crowned king, and here the patriarchs of the Old Testament are buried. It was King Herod who built these fine walls around the tombs, and the whole place is now controlled by Muslims, and it is called the Mosque of Abraham. Still heading north toward Jerusalem, we come to the flat-topped hill in the Bethlehem area called the Herodian. This became another of Herod's fortifications in his obsession for his safety from enemies. Sitting down within the cone of that hill was another well-designed and outfitted complex. An aerial view of the Herodian. Herod was reportedly buried here after processional from Jerusalem, though after extensive excavations, that body has never been found. Another of Herod's building projects was to beautify and strengthen the city he named Sebast, which was the old city of Samaria. He built Hellenistic towers at the gates. Caesarea was the city that was lavished with buildings by Herod. He built every conceivable type of Greek-Roman building here to make an impressive port through which visitors to his country came and went. He spent special attention on the harbor, which has recently seen excavation. This is a modern building resting on ancient foundations. The excavations under the sea have shown that Herod's engineers used great skill in developing a man-made harbor. To supply water to Caesarea, Herod built an aqueduct to the north of the city. We will see many more pictures of Herod's work in Jerusalem in later slideshows. To impress the Jews, his greatest project there was to rebuild the temple into the most beautiful group of buildings that the Jews had ever enjoyed on the hill that had for centuries been devoted to worship of Yahweh. Excavations of Jerusalem are complex because they cover so many different historic periods. These archaeologists are working on the Temple Mount itself. In the next video program, we will visit Jerusalem as it was in the time of Jesus. Then the temple built by Herod the Great was under construction. All that was left when the Romans destroyed it, just 20 to 30 years after it was finished, is the bottom tiers of great stones in the wall to the right, part of what was a retaining wall to the temple area. It is sacred to the Jews over the centuries and is known as the Western or Wailing Wall. Pictures for this video program are credited to the Illustrated Bible Dictionary, Reader's Digest Atlas of the Bible, Reader's Digest Great People of the Bible, Holy Views Incorporated, Doubleday's New Atlas of the Bible, National Geographic Magazine, and Robert Cross.